I think a lot of people stay at their jobs too long. A lot of people feel loyalty to their company and their teammates. Your career is the single biggest asset you have. It is an appreciating multi-million-dollar asset, and you owe it to yourself and your family to steward it wisely and make good long-term decisions for yourself.
From Tuple, this is Distributed, where we show how world-class engineers and their teams tackle the challenges of remote work. I'm Jack Hanna, your host. Hey everyone. In this conversation, I chat with Charity Majors. Charity is a prolific writer, speaker, and of course the co-founder and CTO of Honeycomb, the modern observability company. Now, Charity has strong opinions on a whole bunch of topics, so we had a lot of ground to cover. We talked about how RTO is in many cases just revert deploy to the last known good state. We talked about why she believes 10x engineers are real, but ultimately not what matters. 10x teams are, and how to actually build a 10x engineering team. We talked about why downleveling is often brutal, but really necessary, including building off her own experience moving from the CEO role at Honeycomb to CTO. The conversation was a lot of fun. There's a lot of really tactical tips to uncover here, so I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. So Charity, you've been working remotely on and off as an engineer and as a leader for upwards of 20 years. You're the co-founder and CTO of a distributed and remote company, and you believe that remote work is much worse than in-person work in several ways, at least. And so why do you think remote work is worse than in-person work, and how?
That's such a spicy way of putting it. I would say that remote work is better for some things and worse for other things. And really, the optimal workplace is where you get to use the work style that is best for the work at hand, right? No matter how many startups, no matter how many tools have tried to build a distributed experience that can match the magic of being in a room with a whiteboard, none of them have even come close, right? When you're in that ideation, design stage, we are embodied. We are mammals. We are embodied beings. We evolved. There's such a rich, bandwidth of back and forth interaction when you're face to face with someone. That honestly, if you spend a lot of time at home, it's exhausting when you're around people again, because you're just like, oh God, there's so much more communication coming my way that I'm used to handling. But it's amazing for getting people inspired, neurons firing, and like people collaborating and new ideas. And then once you all kind of know what you're doing, it's much better if you can all go home, put your headphones on, not be interrupted, So I think I'm a big advocate of distributed teams. I think that they have a lot to show for them, but I also think that you kind of have to be realistic with yourself. It's just not the best at everything.
Yeah, I think that nuance is super important. And that's part of what we're trying to represent in the show, is that there's some things that are really great about remote work and some things that aren't. And navigating those differences is critical. Yeah. You posted about this on Bluesky. You had a conversation, I think, with a VC about how RTO was being done for some companies as an actual tactic for retaining more employees.
Their workers. I posted this on Bluesky because it had taken me by surprise, and the internet blew up. Like, this is by far the most reaction I've ever got. For like 2 or 3 weeks, people were still commenting on this thread. Some people just refused to believe it. They're just like, you're lying, or he's lying, or I don't think he was lying. I think that a fair number of companies, the company he was talking about, they were an in-person company. Pandemic happened. Everyone had to stay at home. And they found that the employees who had been around and been working together for a while were fine. They made the transition fine. New hires did not. People that they hired into this environment did not. People who had been hired recently did not. Like, the people who had already built these connections in person together were fine when they dispersed. But it takes a lot of intentional building to onboard people, to build norms, to build systems that make the relationships that make distributed teams work. It doesn't just happen. And it can be extra isolating if you're someone brought into a workplace where these people all formed these bonds without you, you know? And I think this was just like not known to a lot of people. And so, yeah, a lot of CEOs out there, when they're doing the return to office thing, I think there's a lot of assumption of bad faith on behalf of employees. And I believe that sometimes that bad faith is absolutely accurate, but I don't think it's always accurate. I think that there are real CEOs out there, real leadership teams that are looking at the data that shows that their employees are not doing well. They're not, that trust has plummeted, that people's sense of connectedness to their workplace, to their colleagues has plummeted. And, you know, they've built this company and this team as an in-person company. And so RTO is just kind of like reverting to the last known good state.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. I think you mentioned that in one of the follow-up posts to your original thread. It sounds like you highlighted connectedness and trust as two of those things that are really hard to build, or harder to build, I should say, in a remote context than in person. Are there any other realizations you had reflecting on this piece of information from this VC about the differences between in-person and remote that you think are worth sharing?
You have to build systems, you know. I do feel like from a company perspective, a distributed company needs to grow up or mature much faster than, like, when you're all co-located together as a startup. You don't need systems, you know, for a lot of things. They run an implicit or body language. People just know things, right? Because they're in the air. They're mentioned, they're overheard. All communication at a distributed company has to be very intentional. And if you're let's say a 50-person distributed company, you need the maturity and the systems and the structure of a 200 to 500 person company, you know. And when you're a 300 person company, you need the maturity and the systems and the structure of a 1 to 3,000 person company, right? It's like somewhere in the 3 to 10x, you know. You need to grow up sooner. You need to be much more intentional. A lot of people are like, what do managers even do at a remote company? And oh my God, management is so important. It is arguably more important. You need more of it. You need it earlier. The job is different. I think a big part of the reason that it's so hard for companies to jump from, you know, to go from being all in person to all remote is because they hired managers with a skill set for managing in person. There's a lot of implicit, you know, things. That skill set, the skill set of managing fully distributed teams is a very different skill set. It takes practice, it takes training, it takes awareness. You can't just like drop people into this, you know, completely different environment. I also feel like there is a tax. There is a communication tax, a management tax. You need more managers. The ratio of managers to ICs is higher in a distributed company than, because there's so much more. And it's not, or it shouldn't be like a lot of top down telling people what to do, but they are the connective tissue. They are the ones that make sure that the right messages are getting communicated to the right people at the right places, the right time.
That's fascinating. I want to talk a little bit more about the skill set of managing distributed teams. You talked about the coordination tax. You talked about a handful of the activities that distributed managers might need to do, like coordinating communication, building the onboarding docs, making sure that coordination is taking place. But could you maybe share some of the examples of things that you've seen play out that helped you realize that this was so important, or more so important in a distributed context?
Yeah, I think for a long time it puzzled me why we had such seemingly small teams and so many managers at Honeycomb, because I think of us as being a company that is not top down. We're very much about outcome oriented management, giving people a lot of, you know, latitude for intrinsic motivation and owning and understanding their work. And so I was just baffled by this for a long time. And until I realized, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're fully distributed, because our managers are quite busy, you know, and they're doing stuff they're missed if they aren't there. So like, for example, team dynamics. If you're all sitting in an office together, team culture, people know each other, right? They get along. You have to really you have to set aside time to ask people personal questions, to talk about your lives, to do things that are not super work related, to just you be very intentional about building that trust. And either it's someone's job and you're paying someone to do it and it gets done, or it's no one's job and either someone takes on that unpaid labor or it doesn't get done. And then you see that like people just don't feel very connected to their work, or they don't really feel connected to the company, or they don't know what they're supposed to do, or, and I will say one of the things that worries me the most, one of the things that I think we have not solved is junior engineers, like juniors, people early. If someone early in the first 10 years of their career was coming to me for advice, I would say, try to be in office for the first decade. You learn so much that you don't even know to ask, that people don't even know to tell you, just like overhearing conversations or looking over someone's shoulder going, what is that dashboard? There's just so much ambient, you soak it up, right? It's in the air. And as much as we may try, and we do try, you get a tiny, tiny trickle of that if you have a good manager. And if you don't have a good manager, you're kind of on an island on your own.
So it sounds like your number one piece of advice for early stage developers, or people in their careers for that matter generally, is to work in person for the first 10 years, if at all possible. Do you have any tips for getting the most out of a remote work experience as an engineer? Maybe if you are an early career engineer for that matter, and combating some of those ways that make it trickier than in person?
Totally. I think there are a lot of things. One thing you can do is just encourage pair programming. Encourage, like some of the teams that we have actually, I think there's a blog post. I think Ben Darfler wrote a blog post about this a while back when he was managing a team, where he was just like, we spend an hour or 2 hours together. Here's one footnote. I actually think that time differences might be harder to overcome than being distributed. Time differences really hard to overcome for a team. But like, just have everyone be on Zoom together for an hour or two, so that the bar is super low to be like, I'm doing this, I see this, what do you see? Or talk to, just like creating a space where you can share where you lower the barriers to entry for asking questions, for participating, for having small talk, asking people about their day, their family, their pets, their background, getting to know each other a little bit.
Yeah. The theme that I'm hearing from this is that you got to create space for two things. One, that ambient knowledge transfer that happens from just being around other people working. You can get that by being in person, probably in its highest fidelity form. So if you're early stage career, finding one of those in-person opportunities and sacrificing some of the things that it's worse at for this benefit may make a lot of sense. But if you are remote, encouraging activities like hopping on a video call for a couple hours a day with your team, time zones permitting, and creating that space for the ambient knowledge transfer seems really useful, as well as building the connective tissue, that second piece, which affords some of that trust that we were talking about earlier. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Also, just like being conscious of the written culture, developing a writing-based culture, right? I think a lot of companies really struggled because they were used to having a talking culture, right?
Yeah.
And when you're used to writing things down, communicating asynchronously, capturing the decision-making process and result and communicating that stuff out, these are all things that, managers can really help influence. But no matter who you are, if you want to be successful in a distributed team, you need to be okay with writing culture.
Yeah, I think 37 Signals does about as good a job at that as anybody. They're sort of well known for this. I interviewed a principal engineer there. She talks a lot about their writing culture and how it was so striking when she first joined. And so I want to switch gears here a little bit, Charity. We talked about some of the ways in which remote work can be more challenging than in-person work and the ways to get around that. You actually also recently wrote a piece about 10x engineers and the fact that while you believe them to be real, you don't actually think they're what matters most, but instead this 10x team to be the kind of most important thing to strive for. So could you describe for us why you believe in 10x engineers, but ultimately don't think they matter all that much?
There are absolutely engineers out there who are 10 times as productive as other engineers. Like that just seems like obviously correct, right? Also, I don't think it matters that much because individuals don't own software surface. They don't own product, or they shouldn't, like if you're a very small startup where there's just one or just a few of you, your customers don't expect you to be around very long, right? And so like reliability and redundancy, all these things are not your priority, then that's like an exception. Obviously, I've been there. It's a super fun time. And then sure, like the faster you can spit out code, the better. But like ultimately, the cost of software development is not in the writing of it. It is in the owning of it, the maintaining of it, the extending it, the fixing it, the building features, the refactor, the supporting it over the life cycle. And that is a team sport. And from the leadership perspective, I do feel like we collectively, we're really obsessed with being the smartest and the best and hiring the smartest and the best. But if your leadership team spends a lot of its energy budget trying to chase after these 10x engineers or like recruit the best of the best, I actually think that is the easy and obvious thing to do. And it's not the most valuable thing to do, because the best engineering organizations in the world, in my definition, are the ones where pretty normal engineers can consistently show up to work, put in a normal amount of effort, having a normal amount of skill and background, and move the business goals forward every single day together. That is it's a much higher bar to clear from a leadership management perspective. It's harder to do, but they have such a competitive advantage. They can hire normal engineers for normal salaries and get great things out of them. And these are the environments that actually mint the world's best engineers, in my experience. It's not really just the ones that start out the smartest or go to MIT or whatever. It's the ones who get to work in environments where they ship hundreds of times a day. Every time you ship a diff, you get to learn something real, right? The faster you can move, the more confidence you can move with.
Yeah, and hearing you talk about it, it becomes sort of obvious that it's way more advantageous to be in an environment where you can hire normal people and see outsized results. There's more normal people than there are exceptional people. So that gives you way more optionality on the front end. And you're also talking about this other thing, which I think is kind of interesting, which is that those environments that allow normal engineers to be so effective are also the types of environments that actually mint some of those 10x qualities. I want to talk about that in a bit, but I want to summarize some of the characteristics that I thought I heard you say of a 10x team. One, I heard shipping with pace, so being able to ship constantly, frequently, early and often, moving with confidence and understanding your changes. Are there other characteristics of a team that produces an environment that allows normal engineers to be so effective?
Absolutely. A big one is just trust. People trusting each other. Like the no assholes rule is super, and this sounds really obvious, right? But like, you want people to show up curious and interested in their work. So like psychological safety, right, is a real thing. Also, communication skills are really important because, and at Honeycomb, when we interview, we have a little hour-long sort of coding thing. We're like, hey, take this, take an hour, do what you can. But that's not the interview. The interview is then you come back and you have a call with 2 other engineers and just talk through what you did, the decisions you made, why you made them, what you would have done with more time, maybe what you wish you had done instead of what you did when you got to the end. Just like talk me through, because in my experience, if you can talk me through how and why you're solving a problem, you can write the code. That's not a question. You'll figure it out, especially in the era of AI, right? But the reverse is not necessarily true. And those communication skills, and this is not something you're necessarily born with. This is a learnable skill, being able to communicate what's in your head, talk it through with people, give and take. I used to be terrible at this. You can practice, right? But like, it's a big part of what it takes to to operate as a team, to ask questions. It helps you learn when you're in the junior spot. It helps you teach when you're in the more senior spot. And I think really healthy teams are the ones where people don't get stuck in the junior or the senior spot for too long, right? Everybody gets used to going back to the well and learning new skills. Another really interesting thing that I think is a good idea for these kinds of high performing environments is to set an expectation that nobody's going to be on a team for more than 3 years, like so that you don't just get these sort of like backwaters where they're different from the rest of the company. There's people there who are irreplaceable, who can't go, it's like circulating the blood, right? Keeps everyone a little humble, gives everyone new challenges, make sure that people aren't just getting, bored. You don't really want people who are just going to want to do the same thing every day for 10 years, right? You want people to get used to taking on new challenges, to trying new things. And so I feel like just sort of setting an expectation of, moving around, trying new things. I think it's really healthy.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing hearing some of these characteristics of these teams. If you're somebody interviewing for a job, what advice would you offer to identify whether or not a company actually has these characteristics to figure out if it's a place where you could be successful or ultimately become one of these 10X engineers, to the extent that that's not who you think you already are?
I would encourage, first and foremost, leaders at companies like this to speak more openly about it and incorporate it into your interview, because it really is. It's a differentiator, and it can help you attract top talent. From the perspective of the person who's doing the applying, I think you can ask questions like, how long does it take for a line of code to get, after I write it, to get into production? What's the process? What does it take? How long does it take? How predictable it is? I think it tells you a lot about that company's investment into these tool sets, these systems, how they prioritize it. I also think another signal that correlates pretty strongly is, what is your attitude towards management? Is it a promotion or is it a change of career, right? Do you have a job ladder that tracks ICs along with managers? Or, if I'm a staff engineer here, what kind of decisions do I get to make? What kind of things do I get to own? What is there a pay gap? I think that it sounds very tactical, but it tells you a lot about how a company values technical leadership. And then I think even just looking at the diversity of their teams. I don't think that diversity is a perfect analog for, does this company have morals and standards? But it's also not nothing, right? Because it doesn't tend to happen by accident.
3 things that I heard you say, Charity, that would be useful to ask about in the interview process. How does code actually make it in production after you write it? What does the career ladder look like? How do they think about promotions, both for individual contributors and management, and the relationship between them, as well as what their approach is to diversity in particular, because that sort of thing doesn't usually happen just by accident. And so, hopefully that's really helpful advice for folks considering new jobs, especially in the current market. I know it's tough to find any job that or any place that's hiring, but having some advice to really show that you're invested in finding some place that you individually can be successful, I think actually goes a really long way in showing up as more attractive yourself. So that hopefully this is useful.
I think a lot of people stay at their jobs too long. I think a lot of people feel loyalty to their company and their teammates. And what I tell people all the time is, your career is the single biggest asset you have. It is an appreciating multi-million-dollar asset, and you owe it to yourself and your family to steward it wisely and make good long-term decisions for yourself. You can't save everyone, right? And if it's not working out for you, especially if you're an IC, you should go somewhere else. Life's too short.
Yeah, that actually makes for a pretty interesting transition to another topic I want to talk about, which is down leveling. You co-founded Honeycomb as CEO originally. And you had shared with me in kind of our conversation before this that the transition from CEO to your current role as CTO to be particularly brutal. I think there's probably a lesson here that folks could benefit from. Why was the transition from CEO to CTO so hard, and how did it affect your relationship with your co-founder, Christine, who actually took over?
Yeah, it was rough. And one thing, and we have a great relationship now, but like it was a lot to work through, which is ironic because I never wanted to be CEO. But it's still, I think, we're naked monkeys, right? And it is part of being a mammal that we're sensitive to hierarchy. And the step, anytime you do something that feels like a step down, it's a lot to take. It's a lot to process, whether or not, even if it's something you want, and which is why, like, to this day, I have so much respect for anyone who I meet who is like, I tried being a VP and I decided not to anymore. Or like the ego swap, the ego death that is involved in just going from being a manager back to being an IC sometimes, or a director to an IC, which is why I'm such an advocate for making that not infused with hierarchy and implications for all this stuff. Because I think that most of that stuff is just not useful or healthy. It's just real. And this is like this plays out in so many different ways, right? I feel like anytime that you have to down level something, when you're doing it to something, you almost always lose the person, right? If they volunteer for it and they say they want it, I feel like you have about 50-50 shot of retaining them. A lot of people can't hack it, can't take it. It is really hard to take being down leveled, being demoted in perception or reality. You almost always lose the person.
Yeah. You mentioned that you have a lot of respect for folks who've gone through that. Do you ever think it makes sense to do so intentionally, or is it just that you do? Okay. So tell me more about that.
I think that the swinging between management and IC work, especially, I think we've gotten better at this industry at like celebrating people who go back to being an IC and acknowledging the leadership work there, right? I think that the barrier there it's gotten a lot lower and it's gotten easier. I think that the delta between being a manager and a director is as big as the delta between being an IC and a manager. Because when you go to manage managers, pretty much every manager, especially first-time managers, they manage mostly out of personal charisma. So, something unique about them that makes people willing to listen to them, right? When you start managing managers, that's no longer, you don't have access to that anymore, right? Because they have to manage their ways and you have to figure out how to guide them, to coach them to be effective. It's a different skill set. And when you go up to being a VP, like the higher you go in the ranks, like nobody should ever have to report to the CEO unless they are done with their, like, because you aren't getting any management from the CEO. The CEO just got business to do, right? And you are business. And if you report to the CMO or the CTO, likewise, you are not getting much personal like the level of personal career development management that you get as an IC from a manager, it only goes downhill as you go up the ladder. And I think it's a different job. And I think having the self-awareness, if you've been a CTO or a VP or whatever, having the self-awareness to go, I don't love this. This does not spark joy. I don't see myself getting good at this, or I just don't want to. Another reality about going up the chain is the whole work-life balance thing that people are I fully support being very disciplined about that. The higher you are, the less you get any say. Like the company's needs, like if you are an exec at the company, what has to get done. And you are the buck stops with you, So there are all sorts of reasons why I think it can make sense for someone to take a step back, there are lots of reasons, right? We could talk about this question all day. Or if they want to explore a different level at a different company at a different stage with a different set. I just think that the more we can drain this sort of hierarchy and sense of superiority, inferiority out of these decisions, the better decisions everyone can make for themselves and others.
Yeah. So I'm hearing a couple of things, two that are sticking out to me. One is that It's implicit in what you're saying, I think, at least, that individuals are likely to be more successful in some contexts than others. Sure, there's some people that we've probably all met who seemingly are successful at everything that they do. While that's almost never actually the case, I've certainly encountered folks that seem that way. The reality is that each person is more or less likely to be successful in different situations, and the context matters. And so what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that because there's such a significant delta between some of these roles, like between IC and management and then management directorship, et cetera, that if you're in one of these roles and start to recognize that you're not enjoying yourself or not finding the success that you thought you might, the down-leveling could be a way to be much happier and potentially more successful, at least in your own individual role. It sounded like what you were mentioning earlier, though, was also a respect that you see for these people because of the self-awareness and the sort of psychological work that person has to go through and do to fight through all the ego stuff that's associated with making this move. And I'm wondering if there's some real benefits to going through that muck that also are worth considering, not just for the suffering that you endure in doing it, but because there's some sort of inherent benefit in that. Is there anything there that's worth exploring?
I think so. I think it's different for everyone, obviously, but I think that the basis, the root of all virtue is, it starts with self-knowledge, right? Self-awareness. I think we don't really know what we're capable of or what we truly love or what we truly don't love until we're tested at our edges sometimes, you know? I mean, if you think about it, self-awareness, self-knowledge, if you don't understand yourself, all of these virtuous things you can do, they're performative. They're not authentic unless they are rooted in this knowledge of yourself and who you are and what you value and what you're here on earth to do, you know?
Yeah. Were there any particular lessons that came from your experience going from CEO to CTO that are worth sharing?
Yes, many. I mean, sure. I learned I like I said, I never wanted to be CEO. I did it reluctantly. One thing I learned was that I think you really want a pretty structured person to be your CEO, and I am not that, and I don't want to try and be that. I'm now the most senior IC in our company, and I love it. I love it. Sometimes I just got done managing our PPPs and part of the people team because our leader left and I just got to pinch hit. I got diagnosed with ADHD in 2020. And so much of my life now retrospectively makes so much more sense, you know? And that sort of like path of, it's not an easy path to get here, but I know myself so much more deeply. And I feel like I can empathize with, when I see other people going through, whether they have intentionally or non-intentionally, had to go through this experience. Like, I feel like I can be there for them in a way. I'm just like, yeah, this sucks, and just kind of hold space for them in that, in a way that I don't think I could have done before. I learned a lot about myself for the past. So I never thought I would start a company. I've said this many times, I really despise people who think that they're too good to work for other people. And I was never interested in the business side of any business side. I was the DevOps engineer in the corner, just like grumbly and, and then in 2016, as I was leaving Facebook, the opportunity arose and I was just like, yeah, hell yeah, sure. On behalf of all women, queers, dropouts everywhere, I accept. I'll take this buggy for a ride. I'm sure we'll crash and we'll go out of business in the next year or two. But that's a fun way to spend a couple years, right? Never in a million years occurred to me that I would be here now. But the journey, I am so grateful for the opportunity. I have learned so much about how to be a human, how to have hard conversations with people in my life when it's time to have those hard conversations, how to do so in a way that's less reactive and more outcome oriented, how to hold space for other people who are going through really rough times.
Yeah, well, it actually relates kind of closely to one of the wrap up questions I have for you. I've been doing this bit where we do kind of like a rapid fire wrap up. So I have a series of questions. They're designed to be answered somewhat quickly. Nothing too high pressure, but hopefully there's some tidbits and nuggets for folks to take from these as they wrap up their listening to our conversation. What's the best piece of advice you could give to someone who's just starting their career in software?
I would tell them it's going to be hard. Because I feel like we often tell people it's going to be easy or not that hard. And there's just a certain amount you have to push through. We did not evolve to learn to type out algorithms and data structures. It's going to be tough, but there's so much joy in it, right? It is one of the few careers that is just lifelong learning and exploration and collaboration and creativity and joy. So stick with it. You'll get there.
That's great. What's your favorite tool, digital, physical, or otherwise, for improving your own productivity or happiness at work?
A notebook and rainbow pens. I learn very visually by reading, and so I've tried all kinds of digital productivity, but what works for me is writing. And when it's all different colors, I can remember things better. I process. It brings me joy.
Very cool. I love hearing an analog or physical good for that. What's one question about remote work that you don't feel like you have the answer to yet?
We mentioned earlier the question of how to bring juniors up. I would say that, but since I've already said that, I will say I would love to actually have a hybrid culture, but I don't know how to get people to want to come back into the office with me. So TBD. I would love to have a couple of offices where people work at least part-time, just because while I love so many of the things remote work has done for us, I also feel like it's not great for me as a human. My tolerance for people has really nosedived, and the energy it takes out of me to be around other people, the longer I go without leaving my house, the harder it gets for me to leave my house. It's not good for me personally. And so I'm trying to find my path back to a hybrid model somehow.
Yeah, two great questions. How to bring juniors up and how to do hybrid humanely, bring people with you. Clearly, based on the response to your Bluesky post about RTO being something that might have been in good faith. There are a lot of people who don't think you can do hybrid in a way that's not going to be interpreted terribly. So I get why that would be top of mind. Last one, who's the technologist you've been paying more attention to lately and why?
I think I and everyone in the world has been paying a lot of attention to Simon Willison ever since the AI boom. He's just so level-headed, so prolific, and such a good writer, and I really love him. But I'll also throw in there Dr. Kat Hicks, who claims that she is not a technologist. She's a psychologist of technologists, but she has a great newsletter. She thinks about her site is called Do It for the Human or something about the human or something. And I just think she's got a really sharp, insightful view into what's going on right now. So,
well, we'll link to both of them for folks who are interested in finding their work. I think that's great. Charity, thank you so much for being generous with your time and perspective. It's really nice to chat with you and learn from you in this conversation. If folks want to hear more about you and your work, where should they go?
You can go to honeycomb.io. We have a blog there. You can also go to charity.wtf for my personal blog. We're in the middle of writing the second edition of Observability Engineering right now. It will be out in a few months. And I also, when I'm not writing the book, I occasionally write on Bluesky at charity.wtf. Thanks for having me.
We'll include all those links. Yeah, no, I absolutely, the pleasure's all mine. We'll include those links so folks can find you. And thanks again.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us on Distributed. If you want to learn more about what we covered in this episode, or if you want to share your own thoughts, follow @Tuple on X or visit distributed.fm.